All right. So before we get going into material, a couple things off the top. So I got the exam grades posted yesterday. Sorry for a little bit of delay on that. The machine to scan them was having some issues. So I put up an announcement, kind of mentioned some of this, but I'll kind of run through it. So the average between the two sections was like a 73, 74 if you're looking at the mean median. Your section was a little bit higher. So good job for you guys. I know it's a little bit later in the day. Maybe that plays a role. But overall, kind of grades in the class across the two sections, once again, kind of that low B range. So it's generally right where I like to see things at this point in this semester. You know, one thing, those averages, there's some unofficial drops where people didn't take the exam. So what's that going to do to the average? Pull it way down, right? So a couple of those zeros, if you remove those, the average is actually a little bit higher on the midterm. Also, current grades are a little bit higher than what they might look like here. But overall, I mean, like I said, I've had semesters where the grades were much worse in this second midterm. Overall, you guys did pretty well. I know you might not like that average of like a mid, mid 70s, but that's generally where I want that second midterms kind of average to be. Okay. If you're wanting to, I'm trying to kind of keep up on emails. I got a flurry of emails yesterday. I've tried to respond to a lot. I'll work through them when I'm in my office today. It might take kind of till tomorrow. I teach most of the day on Tuesday, Thursdays. If you want to review your exam, I can't sit down with each one of you for an hour or two, right? I've got 600 of you. So what you can do is come by during office hours. I can give you your Scantron. We can kind of quickly go through the ones that you got wrong and kind of give you an idea of where the mistakes, kind of what mistakes you were making. If my office hours tomorrow don't work for you, I've already scheduled a couple people on Friday to drop by real quick. Next week, you can stop by during office hours to kind of take a look at that Scantron, review those. But it's probably going to be a good idea if you didn't do as well to review the ones you got wrong, because we're just going to build, everything builds on itself from here on out, right? So I think you'll see that a lot today, where we use the firm cost, we use demand shifts. So everything from here on out is going to build on what we've already done. So if you do want to review that, office hours are the best time to stop by and kind of review those exams. If they don't work for you for whatever reason, your schedule, reach out to me and we'll try to set up a time where you can kind of drop by and take a look at it. Okay. I also kind of mentioned on this announcement yesterday, I think some people, the last question wasn't the last one was like opinion based, but the last question where you could actually put a response, it said select all that apply and it was only allowing you to select one. I'm not sure why it's bugged because I looked at it and it doesn't look like it should be. It might be like a web browser compatibility thing. Any answer that you put there should count it as correct. So it should have made a big difference. I think I can update it after the fact. So when you review it, you can see all of the answers that were true. And also, I failed to mention it during the exam Thursday. So just to be fair, I put an announcement up Thursday and I put up an announcement yesterday reminding you to do that module 10 reading. But in case, to be fair, I didn't mention it on Thursday's class. When I get back to my office, I'll reopen it so that the due date, if you didn't get it done, you can do it before we meet in class on Thursday. Okay. So still get on if you failed to realize or read the announcements that I was posting on Canvas, which I've mentioned. I use Canvas outside of class to communicate with you and convey messages to the class. But I will extend that due date before we meet in class on Thursday if you didn't get that module reading done. From here on out, just like before, every Monday, at the end of the day, you should have a module reading due and a quiz due from here on out for the rest of the semester. Okay. So for this week's quiz, we've got the practice problems, right, with the answers. There'll be a quiz posted after class on Thursday. CL sessions kind of resume as normal this week. They'll cover module 10 this week and then kind of, so on and so forth as we kind of cover the rest of the material. The final, like getting a lot of these questions, a lot of them can be answered if you look at the syllabus that's under the files tab and has been all semester. But the final, is it cumulative? No, I've said this many times. No, it's the last 4 modules we cover, right? Now, it's cumulative in the sense that we're building on everything. So you'll see today, we're using a lot of the stuff we've already talked about, but it's just the last 4 modules that we covered, okay? Other than that, I think that's everything I wanted to mention about the exam. Let me think if there's anything else. Oh, the other thing I did want to make sure I worked through. Here, we'll do this first. So you will be able to see kind of what your scores are in these different categories, right? This is like a hypothetical person, so these don't really mean anything. But right, you've got your midterms, the pack-back, class participation, which are the in-class quizzes, etc. It also reminds you at the top what the categories are weighted as, right? So anything that's in these assignments, these are just like things that you have submissions that I don't want to delete, but they're not things counted towards your grade. So I think like one of the in-class quizzes I scaled up because of an issue with it, but kept that original kind of submission. So the only thing that's been counted towards your grade is anything in these categories that have percentages next to them, and those percentages are in line with what the syllabus says, okay? So that final exam is going to be worth 26%. Notice it's the only thing that kind of remains. So that's not being factored into your grade currently. So the exams right now aren't impacting your grade as much as all of your exams will at the end, because what, 40% out of 74 versus 67, 8% out of the whole 100. So what I've done to kind of give you an idea as you're starting to think about your final grade in this class, what you currently see on Canvas is going to give you a pretty close idea of where your current grade is, right? It's just that we haven't done the final yet, so can't calculate your actual final grade without the final exam. So what you can do is go to the Files tab, leave Student View, not you, me. And I've got this hypothetical grade tool, okay? Oh, looks like I already had this opened up, but it's okay, we can have two versions. So there's three tabs here at the bottom. So this first row under this hypothetical grade tab is like if you got 100s on everything and you attended every single CL session. So that'll be a total of 3 points. There should still be 5 remaining CL sessions, 1 for each week, and then there'll be 1 in that review week, basically before the final exam. So right now, I think the total you could have is 1.75 if you're looking at those CL points, which I also have updated and should be up to date for everything kind of from, all the previous CL sessions up to this point. So here's kind of like a perfect score. This next column, you can simply go to that grade tab on Canvas that we were just looking at, take your individual grades and just kind of plug them in here, okay? So you'll notice here, like I could plug in 76.9, 100, 190, 76, etc. This is one where you'll just enter in what you see on Canvas. You could then start to play around. Okay, this person's like, I don't know, let's do some different numbers. Let's do like an 84 here. And you can say, okay, look, if I get a 90 on the final, is that going to be enough to kind of get me up to that B plus, which is 87? That's pretty close. So if I attend another CL session or 2, that would kind of bump me up past this, right? So, okay, if I attend 2 more CL sessions, sure enough, now I'm at an 87. But if I only get an 80 on here, well, what do I need to do? If I don't attend any CL sessions, how can I keep my B? Well, could I get a 70? No, that would be a B minus, a little bit lower. What about a 74? Really close to the cutoff, right? You can kind of play around with a hypothetical final exam grade to see what your final grade would be in the class. Is that any questions, what I'm saying there? So you would take your current scores for all of these categories, right? The different types of assignments, as well as the first 2 midterms. You could then play around with this hypothetical final exam grade and see what your final score would be in the class. Now, this last row, if you want to do a little bit of additional work, and you get this, might be a little confusing if you're not super comfortable with Excel. However, if you are, for the module reading, pack back assignment, and your midterms, you would just put in the grades that you see on Canvas. So I have them set to be equal to. If you just want to plug in those grades in that second row that you see on Canvas, what you can then do for this third row is go to these other tabs. So this person, hypothetical, this would be your quiz scores. So like they got some 15s and some 12s here. So currently the grade you would see on Canvas is a 90. However, I dropped your 2 lowest at the end of the semester. So I left enough columns for the 4 remaining quizzes. You can kind of put these in as we go. And what this will do is it essentially calculates what your quiz grade would be with those 2 lowest quizzes dropped. Now, I don't do that until the very end of the semester on Canvas, but you can do it here on this Excel file. Right? You can do a very similar thing, excuse me, for the in-class quizzes. I'll get this updated so it leaves room to fill in kind of the remaining ones. Right now, it just has enough room for kind of what the current class periods that we've had are. So notice this person is missing a few classes. So the current grade they would see on Canvas for their in-class quizzes is pretty low. Not pretty low, but it's lower because they have zeros. Well, if I drop the 4 lowest at the end of the semester, this kind of calculates that. It drops your 4 lowest. The actual grade you would have with your 4 lowest drop, this person would be is 100. So if you enter in your in-class quizzes and your quiz grades in these 2 tabs, it'll automatically update them here. So instead of a 76, it's using that score where the 4 lowest in-class quizzes drop, and it's using your quiz score with the lowest 2 drop. So it gives you a little bit more of kind of an accurate idea of where your grade would be at the end of the semester. Now, this kind of assumes that you continue to complete all the remaining in-class quizzes and quizzes at like a similar rate. But if you have a couple zeros in there, that might be something that's helpful to kind of let you see, okay, exactly, a little bit closer to what my grade would be, because those lowest scores will end up getting dropped at the end of the semester. And once we get to the end of the semester, like that week before finals, I'll kind of have things, updated so that it'll be very easy to kind of plug in, and I'll kind of update Canvas so you can see what your grade is with the lowest drop. But until we get to that point, we can use this. Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving here? So I think that should be everything related to the exam. We've got this week's materials. I'll kind of start with these slides. So, I'm getting questions about what you can do to increase your grade, or there are additional assignments, or this kind of retake. No, there's no additional. What's the only, I said this from the beginning, day one. What's the only extra credit that's available in this class? Attending those CL sessions. So if you do 1 extra credit, you attend the remaining 5, there's still a 1.25 points that just get added to your final grade. That's quite a bit, right? I mean, you can back out what it would be, the additional increase on an exam score would be based on the percent. Like, that's just points that get added in. So if you're on the cutoff, you have like a 79. Well, if you get 3 points, you only need 1 point, you get 79 to an 80, right? So going to those CL sessions, if you're on the cutoff, can kind of bump you up to that next letter grade. So if you're worried about that, attending those CL sessions, not only do they add points to your grade, they're going to improve your quiz performance probably, right? Because they review the material that week. They're also then likely going to increase your knowledge or understand the material. So what else was likely to be higher? Your final exam score. So all of these are going to be positives that come out of attending those, which is why I reiterate throughout the semester that I think it's a good idea to get to those if you can. Okay. Any other questions for me before we jump into material? I think that should be my spiel about the exam and everything related to that. Okay. All right. Like I said, I know not everyone's probably happy with their score, but overall, right, you guys did pretty well. This section actually, I think I'll have to double check. Maybe I'll have this for Thursday. I think you did the best on this second midterm out of any section I've had at IU so far. So you guys did very well, right? So that should hopefully set us up well for the end of the semester, okay? All right. So we'll kind of dive into new material. Module 10, our perfectly competitive markets. We've kind of already talked about different types of markets at the end of Module 9, like monopolies, things like that. What did we say these perfectly competitive markets? So we had a couple characteristics. So the first was there's going to be no barriers to entry. Firms can enter and exit this market freely. So this is not going to be, it's not going to be a market where, say, the government gives exclusive rights to someone to provide this service to the nation, or where IU has a contract with a specific company. If you want to do something at IU or whatever. So through the pandemic, this was like, different universities had deals with either Zoom or Microsoft Teams. They had like one specific company they were dealing with. That's not it. Firms can enter and exit this market freely. We're going to have many buyers and many sellers. One of the byproducts of this is not only are we going to have many buyers and sellers, we're going to say that these buyers and sellers are price takers. So this is the idea that if I want to sell this product, it's kind of like, I always use the gasoline market. That's the one we'll use today. It has to be that if I want to sell this good for a certain price, if I try to sell it for a higher price, everyone else is going to buy it from somebody else. So I have to take the price as given. If I want to buy it and I offer somebody a lower price in the current equilibrium, well, that just means they're going to try to sell to somebody else who they know will be willing to pay a higher price. So no one buyer or one seller has any market power or any influence over the price, and everybody just has to kind of take that equilibrium price as given, both buyers and sellers. We also need to have this product be homogeneous. So we'll talk about what happens if it's not. But right now, I like the gasoline market because 87 unleaded gasoline is 87 unleaded gasoline. You cannot, it's regulated, so it's the exact same product, right? So we've got these different characteristics. If they're met, we've got these perfectly competitive markets. Now, what can we not have? Things like legal restrictions that keep markets out, keep firms out of the market, natural monopolies. So this is the idea of like, there's certain things like, as we talk more about production decisions, the cost structure sometimes lend itself to there can only be one firm. So like most areas only have one electric company, right? It's a natural monopoly. There's not enough demand to support two firms. So we can't have that. We don't know natural monopolies here, no geographical barriers. Firms can't try to keep other companies out. So we won't dive into this yet. We might touch on it in one of the later modules. But, existing firms sometimes will set the price artificially low because then if they set it low, people who are thinking about entering that market might think, oh, I can't make as high a profits there. So we can't have like current firms creating any type of barriers to entry for other firms as well. Now, I'm not going to like go through these, give you specific examples. We won't focus on this as much, but this is just kind of setting us up, thinking about these perfectly competitive markets. Okay. So homogeneous products, many firms, many buyers, no barriers to entry, and nobody has any influence over the price. That's kind of our story for these perfectly competitive markets. Okay. So what are these firms in these perfectly competitive markets going to do? If I am a company, what am I trying to maximize? How much money I'm making. Or more specific in the terms that we've used throughout the semester, I'm trying to maximize my profits. What type of profits? This is an economics class, so we're trying to maximize economic profits, right? Factoring in not only explicit costs, but also the implicit costs or the opportunity costs as well. So firms are going to try to choose this quantity that maximizes their economic profits, right? That's their goal. Okay. Now, when we have perfectly competitive firms, we said they can't get away with charging a price any different than the equilibrium. If I'm a gas company, there's 4 gas stations on the corners, I have an intersection. If I try to charge 20 cents higher for a gallon of gas, what does everybody do? Buys from the other 3 gas stations, right? So I have to take that equilibrium price, and that's what I'm selling my product for. Now, consumers, firms, everybody, we make decisions, we do something, we sell something, we produce something as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to the marginal cost. What is the marginal benefit to the firm when they sell something? So when I sell something, the benefit to me is the price, right? How much I'm charging. We would also call how much money I'm making by selling something the additional revenue that I'm earning, or my marginal revenue. So with these perfectly competitive markets, our equilibrium price of that good, because every single person selling the exact same product, 87 unleaded gasoline, I have to charge that equilibrium price. That becomes the firm's marginal revenue. So firms will produce, or they will increase the quantity they produce as long as the marginal benefit or the marginal revenue is above their marginal cost. Now that marginal revenue also happens to be equilibrium price of that good. Okay. So I think I've got kind of a visual here. In fact, I've got stuff in the slides, but we can kind of do this side by side, make it a little bit bigger. Might help to kind of piece this out. So if I'm kind of thinking about my market quantity, and then I'm going to stack that up against the firm's quantity, right? I have 2 different kind of graphs here. Here's my supply curve. Here's my market demand curve. Here's my equilibrium price, okay? Where supply is equal to demand. We said if this firm in this industry, in this perfectly competitive market, if it's perfectly competitive, that price is going to be their marginal revenue. Well, it's going to be the marginal revenue of what unit? Well, if I sell the first gallon of gasoline, I can charge whatever the price is. If I sell the second unit, I can charge whatever the price is. Because I have to sell the third unit. So for every unit, what is my marginal revenue? It's whatever that equilibrium price is. So we would also kind of call this the firm's demand curve. So notice like capital D, that's like market demand, lowercase d, and I'm using one here because I'm going to kind of show you a different demand curve. Lowercase d, we think of that as like the firm's demand. Okay. So the marginal revenue curve the firm faces will simply be whatever that equilibrium price is. So if there's something in this market, let's say for gasoline, I don't know, gasoline powered vehicles, the price decreases. It's a complementary good. So if it decreases, price of gasoline powered cars goes down, its complement, the demand would go up. So this is where we're using things we've already talked about, right? The price of a complementary good going down, its complement, that would drive its demand up. Because we're using these together, it's almost like using them now has become cheaper. So we would see this increase or rightward shift in demand. Now, that's in the market demand. So what is that going to do? It's going to increase. It's kind of hard to see green here. It's going to increase my equilibrium price. So what is the firm's demand now? Well, it's the new equilibrium price. So my firm's demand curve is going to be higher. Okay. So changes in the market are going to have or create changes in the firm's marginal revenue. Now, if the firm's marginal revenue changes, what is also going to change? Well, how do they make decisions? So the firm is going to compare their marginal revenues to their what's increasing as you produce more. So I choose to do something as long as the marginal benefit is greater than or equal to my marginal costs. So initially, where would the marginal revenue be equal to the marginal cost? Okay, every unit here, the marginal revenue is above marginal cost. So that would be like positive profits, if you want to think about it that way. So here would be the optimal quantity for the firm to produce. After that demand shift in the market, that causes the equilibrium price to go up, the firm's demand curve to also go up, the marginal revenue that they're facing is higher. So think about it this way. If the price I can sell gasoline for goes up, am I going to want to sell more or less than I was before? Guys, if you're in a business, if the price of something is higher, you're going to want to sell more or less than you were before. More, right? So don't get too lost in the graphs. The intuition tells us that, right? So the equilibrium price goes up. That means my marginal revenue, how much I can make selling this goes up, which means ultimately the point at which marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is going to be higher. Right? I'm going to want to increase the amount that I'm producing. Any questions on that idea? So once again, we're using things we've talked about before, shifts in the market and the demand, right, for the market, identifying optimal quantities. But now is a little bit different than what we did before, but it's really just where's that marginal revenue equal that marginal cost, or the marginal benefit to the firm equals the marginal cost of the firm. Okay. Questions here before we keep moving? Just hopefully making some sense. Right? So let's say I had a scenario where gasoline starts out at $3. Okay. Excuse me. Here would be my firm's demand curve, whatever the equilibrium price is. If the demand goes up, we said what happens to my equilibrium price? Well, the new point in the market where demand is equal to supply is up here. So it's now at a higher price of $4. So what is the firm's demand curve now? It's that $4, or it's going to increase. if we were then kind of making decisions, we kind of drew that marginal cost curve in there. Okay. So let's dive into a little bit more why that point where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost is going to be where profits are maximized for the company, right? So I've told you that at this point, but why is it, right? So let's take a step away from marginal revenue, marginal cost for a second. If I'm selling something, so like, you know, it doesn't matter what it is, as long as the amount of money I'm making is above the amount of money I'm spending, what's going to be true about my profits? They're going to be positive. What am I really saying? If my total revenues are greater than my total costs, I know my profits are positive. Right? If my total revenues are less than my total costs, I know my profits are going to be negative, or I'll have losses. If they're exactly equal, I'm spending the exact same amount of money that I'm making, my profits are going to be exactly equal to 0, right? Or I'm breaking even. We'll kind of use this terminology of breaking even. That's where profits are equal to 0. Okay. So nothing, I don't think, too crazy here with that idea. So if I had like a table, it looks something like this. I've calculated profits, but how did I do that? All I did was at every single quantity here, I looked at my total revenue, I subtracted my total cost, the difference would tell me my profits. So initially, notice if I produce low quantities, my profits start out as negative. But if I produce more and more, my profits are still negative, but it's a smaller negative value. So would I rather have profits of -6 or -3? Well, if they're negative, they're losses. So would I want my losses to be larger or smaller? Smaller, right? I'd rather have -3 than -6. So I'm going to continue to increase how much I'm producing because my profits are getting higher. They're still negative, but they're higher than they were before. Now, eventually there's a point, looks like what quantity would be my break-even quantity here? At what point would profits become positive? Looks like a quantity of 5. From there, if I continue to increase my production, once I get to that quantity of 10, if I go to that 11th unit, what's happening to my profits? They start to go down. So what level of output here is going to maximize my profits? 10, right? Now, another way I can think about this is like, what's the, really, I'm just looking for what the highest value of profits is, right? That's where I want to be producing. I'm trying to maximize my profits. So I'm choosing the quantity where my profits are maximized. Okay. Now, another way we can identify this point is not simply the difference between total revenue and total costs. We can also identify this point based off of the margin, or marginal revenues and marginal costs. So I'm looking at this example here. I'm going to skip a couple steps. We'll see if you guys are following me. What's the price of this good? What's the price of gasoline in this table here? How do you know it's 4? So if you're dividing total revenue by quantity, right, that works. Why? Because the marginal revenue of every unit is the same. Yep. So I can figure out marginal revenue just like we were figuring out marginal cost. How did I calculate marginal cost? It was the change in my total cost divided by quantity, change in quantity. What would marginal revenue be? A change in total revenue divided by a change in quantity. Well, here, change in quantity is 1. So the change in total revenue of 4 divided by a change in quantity of 1, my marginal revenue is 4, which means that must be the equilibrium price. How could I find my marginal costs? Simply between every quantity, look at the change in my total cost. So for this first unit, what would my marginal cost be? Looks like my costs are going up by 3.8. Change in quantity is 1, so 3.8. What's the marginal cost of the second unit? Looks like I'm going from 9.8 to, so 3 is the change. 3 over 1 is 3. So I could, I'll skip ahead here for a second. So we already kind of talked about this. I'll come back in a second. So I could calculate that marginal revenue and marginal cost column pretty quickly, right? So change in total revenue divided by a change in quantity gives me marginal revenue. In these perfectly competitive markets, that marginal revenue is the same for every single unit. So once I find it for the quantity of 1, I know what it is for every other quantity. Now the marginal costs are going to vary. What should happen to my marginal costs? We said initially they might start to decrease as I produce more. Why did that happen? We go back, yeah, gains from specialization. At that quantity of 7, now my marginal costs start to go up. That must mean my gains from specialization are gone. What has taken over? Diminishing returns. So we kind of had this Nike swoosh symbol. That's what we said, marginal costs look like. So we'll go back here for a second. I just wanted to kind of jump the gun a little bit. So we've got this idea of that profits are going to be the difference between total revenue and total cost. And that should be the same as identifying that profit maximizing quantity using our marginal revenue and marginal cost. Okay. So here, let's say, what do I want here? So if I'm thinking about the quantity I'm producing, my total revenues, if I don't sell anything, that looks something like this. And then my total costs, right? So if I'm thinking about initially, let's see. And don't worry too much about this. I'm probably not going to use these to ask you questions, but just to kind of give an idea a little bit of where this is coming from. If I'm thinking about profits, you can kind of see here, initially, my total revenues are going up, my costs are going up by a larger amount, right? So what's true? Oh, I don't want this. I drew this upside down. Hold on. That's not going to work for the example we're doing. All right, so I wanted my total revenues here, and I wanted I'm writing without thinking what I'm doing. I want to show you this first. So here we go. So let's say I've got something that looks like, here's my total cost, here's my total revenues. Initially, at low quantities, what's going to be true about my profits? At these quantities, total cost is above total revenue, so my profits would be negative, right? Now, at this quantity, my profits start to become what? Positive. So we can kind of think about this would be like my break-even point. Now, if I continue to increase my quantities past this point, so this would be where profits are equal to 0. Now my total revenues are above my total costs, so profits will be positive. However, the biggest gap between my total revenue and total cost, that gap between those is going to represent profits. So I want to choose the quantity where that gap is at its greatest. Past that point, yes, my total revenues are above my total cost. My profits are still positive, but that gap starts to get smaller, right? So it's kind of like if I'm graphing out my profits, they kind of have this upside down U shape to them. We won't use this a lot in terms of like the questions I ask you, but just kind of setting us up, thinking about what's happening to profits. Initially, they could even start out as negative. There will be a point where they break even. I'm then trying to find the quantity where they're maximized. This would be kind of like that equilibrium or optimal quantity for the firm to choose. Now, what's going to end up being true about that quantity, let me try to leave this here for a second, is if I was making decisions based off of my marginal revenue and my marginal costs, my marginal costs are increasing. Now, technically, if I had some gains from specialization, they would start out with kind of that little tail where we have that gains. Now, we know we're always going to end up on the portion of the marginal cost curve where diminishing returns take over, but we might have that. Now, what's going to end up being true is that point where profits are maximized is going to end up being the same point where the marginal revenue of the last unit produced is the exact same as the marginal cost. Okay? So whether or not I'm looking at the marginal revenue, the marginal cost to determine that quantity, or I'm using the gap in between my total revenue and total costs, I still should find that same profit maximizing quantity, and it would result in the same profit maximizing level of profits. Okay. Now, what we're likely going to have to rely more on is going to be using marginal revenues and marginal costs, but it's all connected. Okay. You can think about, well, what is the marginal revenue, marginal cost? It's just the slopes of these lines. Okay. Any questions on anything before we go back to the slides here? Might have went a little more in depth than I need to here, but I'm just trying to kind of give us a more of a complete picture before we jump into solving maybe some more problems, right? So we've already talked about how we would find marginal cost, marginal revenues. We then talked about kind of the optimal production rule is going to be where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenues. The next thing we'll do is kind of go back thinking about how can I connect this idea? So remember we said profit was just the difference between total revenue and total cost. That means that the change in profit or my marginal profit would just be the difference between my change in revenues minus my change in costs, or the difference between my marginal revenues and my marginal costs. So anytime my marginal revenue is above marginal cost, the change in profit will be positive. Is that a good thing if I'm selling something? Yes. If the marginal costs ever become greater than my marginal revenue, what's going to happen to the change in my profits? It's going to be negative. Is that a good thing? No. So I wouldn't want to produce those units. So we're thinking about when do we want to produce? As long as marginal revenue is above marginal cost, up to the point where they're exactly equal to each other. At that point where they're equal, we would say profits have been maximized. Okay. So if I'm looking at this graph, we kind of already talked about how to find that, or graph, this table, where the marginal revenue and the marginal cost columns come in. Here I've calculated the level of profits. So you'll kind of notice, if I take the difference between total revenue and total cost, that point where they were at its highest was that 9.5. So what should be true is that that should be the unit, the last unit where the marginal revenue was greater than or equal to the marginal cost. So I use these numbers to kind of show you an example where there won't always be an equal thing. So we're going to produce up to the point as long as marginal revenue is greater than or equal to, but we might not always have an equal to point. So for example, here, the marginal revenue is above the marginal cost. So I produce this unit, profits go up a little bit. Marginal revenue is above marginal cost, profits go up. Above marginal revenue, above marginal cost, that continues all the way up to, at the 10th unit, marginal revenue is still just barely above marginal cost, but still above it. So my profits are still going up. So I'm going to produce that 10th unit. What about the 11th unit? Well, there the marginal revenue is less than the marginal cost. So then my profits should be negative, right? And in fact, so before I kind of add to this here, we kind of can see that point where the gap between total revenue and total cost was at its largest is the same as the last point where marginal revenue is greater than or equal to marginal cost. Those two things will always lead me to identify the same quantity as being our profit maximizing quantity. Okay. Any questions on that before I keep moving here? Okay. So, how much time do we have? I think we got enough time. I'm going to add something in here. Get rid of this so it makes it easier for us to see things. Oh. So I'm going to add in another column here. There we go. So just to kind of connect these concepts. So what's happening to the change in my profits? So if I go from 0 to 1 units, what was the marginal profit here? Profit went up by 0.2. What about from the first to the second unit? Profits changed by 1. I would kind of continue to do that all the way down here. So I'm not going to fill in the whole column, but from the 7th to the 8th unit, looks like they went up by 2, then 1.2, then 0.1. Now they go down by 1.4. So notice when we're making this decision of what the optimal quantity is, it would also be, as long as marginal revenue is above marginal cost, it's the last quantity where the marginal profit, or the amount that I'm adding to my profits, is still positive. If I go past that point, what am I now adding to my profits? A negative value, which means I'm decreasing my profits, right? So I wouldn't want to produce that 11th unit. Okay. So there's different ways of thinking about what this relationship between marginal revenue and marginal cost means. That difference really would represent, another way you could call that is your marginal profit. As long as that difference is positive, your marginal, or what you're adding to your profits, is a positive amount. That's a good thing. You want to produce that. As soon as your marginal revenue is below your marginal cost, now what am I adding to profits? What's my marginal profits? It's negative. Now I'm just decreasing the profits. I wouldn't want to produce that unit. Okay. Any questions on where I was coming with this? I did it kind of quick. No questions on this? Okay. All right. So I'll go through this quick because I kind of already did this for us earlier. If I've got my marginal cost and my marginal revenue, where's the profit maximizing quantity? Where they're the same, right? So we said, okay, what happens if there's a increase in demand? The quantity the firm chooses would then be higher. Now, there's another thing that could change. So let's say there's like a new technology. Maybe I don't have a change in the demand, or I don't have any change in the market, right? So whatever the equilibrium price was, that was the marginal revenue the firm faced. Here was their original marginal cost. Here was kind of the optimal quantity that the firm chose. Okay. If I've got some new technology that, well, first of all, even if it's not a new technology, what are firms always trying to do? If I have no influence over my revenues, the price that I can charge just is what it is, what am I going to try like hell to change? If I can't change revenues, what can I change? My costs, right? Now, I might not be able to come with a new technology, but maybe what do? I'm paying my workers a bunch, so maybe I try to start making this product in a different country, right? Or I try to find some way I can cut my costs, because if I can lower my marginal costs, once again, don't get too lost in the grass. If I can lower my marginal cost, am I going to want to produce more or less than I was before? More, right? And we can kind of think about why. Because for every unit in this range, what was true before? The additional cost to produce them was greater than the additional revenue. So what was happening? The profit for each one of these units was, if the marginal costs were above the marginal revenue, the profits for each unit were, if it's costing me more to make it, then I can sell it or make money on it. What's happening in what's the profit for that unit? It would be negative, right? Cost me more to make it than I can sell it for. I got negative profits here. However, once I've lowered my cost, what's true for every unit in this range? Now the marginal revenue is greater than my marginal cost. So now every unit here that used to have negative profits is now going to have positive or add to my profits, right? So by lowering my costs, I now have some units where before, if I would have produced them, it would have just produced negative profits. Now they would actually have great positive profits for me. Or once again, if you don't want to get too lost in the grass, the intuition here I don't think is wild. If I can lower my costs, I'm going to want to produce more. Right? It's more profitable for me after I've lowered my cost to produce more units. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
But marginal cost line shifted to the right.
Yep.
That's
So it's not true, right? If we talk about supply, even with market supply, we said a rightward shift in supply would actually represent, yes, an increase in supply, but here we're talking about costs. So when do I supply more? When my costs are lower, right? So at every quantity, my costs are lower. That would be a rightward shift. Yep. So maybe instead of thinking about it right and leftward, when we're talking about costs, maybe it makes more sense or it's easier to remember thinking about vertical shifts. If it shifts down, what's happening to my marginal costs? They are lower. If it shifted up, my marginal cost would be higher. So maybe when we're talking about costs, even though supply represents cost, if it's easier for you to think about the vertical change here in costs, in the cost curves. Yep. It's a good question. Any other questions before we keep moving here? Okay, so we can identify these profit maximizing quantities. We're then going to talk about how can I figure out the level of profits. Okay. So where are we at in time? I want to go to, okay. So it's a little bit tricky here. And I've got this in a slide, but I want to kind of write it out so you can kind of see where it comes from. I might have skipped a little bit of the algebra. How do I find my total revenues for a perfectly competitive firm? Every unit I sell, how much money am I making? We said, yeah, whatever the equilibrium price is times however many units I'm selling. What's my total cost going to be? Well, I'm going to get a little bit tricky here, and I'm just going to multiply it by 1. Okay? Q over Q is 1. I haven't changed anything. I can then think about, okay, if I were to rearrange this a little bit, I would have quantity times total cost over quantity. What does this look like? Total cost over quantity would be my average total cost, right? So I get that my profits will be the price I can sell the good for times the quantity I produce minus the average total cost times the quantity I produce. I've got a quantity on both sides. I'm just going to kind of pull that out front. So notice here is another equation that would give me my profits. Why is this equation helpful? Because this allows me to see when are profits going to be positive, when are they going to be 0, and when are they going to be negative. When would profits, so first of all, quantity is always going to be 0 or higher, right? So when will profits be positive? As long as my price that I can charge is what? Guys, when will this be positive? When price is above average total cost, right? When will they be 0? Whenever my equilibrium price is equal to my average total cost. And when will they be negative? Anytime that price falls below my average total cost. Now, what are average total cost of firms? Another term you might kind of see or think about using it. So it's their per unit costs. If the per unit cost is below, essentially, what is the equilibrium price? That's the firm's marginal. What's the price? If I'm selling something for the price, it is my marginal. You're just wasting time. So the price I can sell something for, if I'm a firm, it's my marginal what? Revenue, right? So I can think about this price, my marginal revenue. We said it's the same for every unit. It's essentially my per unit revenues and my per unit costs. As long as my per unit revenues are above my per unit cost, my profits will be positive. Anytime my per unit revenues fall below my per unit costs, now my profits are going to be negative. Okay. So here's kind of our 3 ranges. Okay. Now, what is this going to look like visually? And I've got a slide that kind of has this. You want to kind of go back and look at it. Since we're here, I'll give you a graph that will show this, and then we'll kind of take a look at the table that shows it as well. So here's my marginal cost curve. Right? Here's my average total cost. From module 9, we know the marginal cost hits the average at its minimum point. Okay. if I've got an equilibrium price, that is my marginal revenue. So if the equilibrium price is anywhere down here, it's going to hit marginal revenue, to hit marginal cost at a quantity where that price is below the average total cost. So any price here, what's going to be true about profits? The price would be below my average total, so profits would be negative. Anytime I've got a price that's anywhere up here, it's going to hit marginal cost at a point that's above average total. So every price in this range, my profits are going to be what? Positive. And at that minimum point, well, here, I'll use green. At that minimum point of my average total cost curve, if the price is exactly equal to that minimum point, there my profits would be what? Exactly equal to zero. So that minimum point of the average total cost curve represents my break-even price. If the price ever goes above that, the optimal quantity will now result in positive profits. If the price ever falls below that, it's now going to result in optimal quantity where I've got negative profits. Okay. Yeah. So it's not because the marginal cost is above. Well, it is. Remember, how do I choose the profit maximizing quantity? It's where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. So anytime my marginal cost is above the average total cost, if my marginal revenue is that high, now my marginal revenue, my price is above the average total cost. That's why profits are positive. Okay. Yep. 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 So it hits marginal cost here. That's going to be above average total. That's why profits are positive. All right. We said as long as price is above average total, profits are positive. Yep. So we can see the same thing play out if we look at the table. Yeah.
How can we say that with an increasing margin cost and also an increasing margin percentage?
So there wouldn't be an increasing marginal revenue. I was just saying any marginal revenue or any price in this range would result in positive profits. Right? So marginal revenue is only going to be one line. Right? We're just thinking about the equilibrium price can move, but at any one point in time, the price is what it is.
Average total cost and cost, will there be lower profits?
There would be if the price didn't change. I'm saying here, if the price is higher, right, then it doesn't matter that the costs are higher. If my marginal revenue is higher, it might be that profits are greatest up here in this range. If I hold constant the price, then yes, higher costs are a bad thing. But here, we're just talking about what ranges for this price would result in positive or negative profits. So if the price is higher, right, that's going to put us in a range where that marginal revenue hits marginal cost at a higher point. And yet, even though the costs are higher, profits are still going to be positive. So it might be a little bit counterintuitive, but because that price is so significantly higher, we don't care that the marginal costs are higher. The price is high enough that it resulted in positive profits. Remember, profits are going to be the change in profits or the difference between marginal revenue and marginal cost.
That is, should make the part below also be profitable.
Huh?
Shouldn't the part which you found negative, should that be also profitable?
No. Because if marginal revenue, if the price falls this low, marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost here, my price is below the average total cost. I'm making less per unit than what it's costing me to make them. I'd have negative profits. Yep. Any other questions before we keep moving here? Okay. So, oops, went ahead a little bit too much here. So if I'm looking at this, if the current price is $4, what was the profit maximizing output? We said, where's the last unit where marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost? At that 10th unit, right? So if I'm looking at that 10th unit, oh, I don't have it highlighted, do I? What's going to be true about that price of 4 relative to my average total cost? It's greater, so my profit should be positive. Sure enough, they're positive 9.5. But I can actually calculate not only are they positive or negative, but what's the actual value, right? If I take this profit equation, it would be that profit maximizing quantity of 10 times the price of 4 minus my average total cost of 305. If I plug all those in, sure enough, what do I get? I get that 9.5, which was the same value I found if I had that total revenue minus total cost. So it's just different ways of calculating profit. Now, where did that $3.05 come from? So this average total cost column, I got to go all the way back. I guess I kind of cheated a little bit. If I know the total cost, how do I find my average total cost? Simply take the total cost and divide it by quantity. So that's where that average total cost column came from. But once I have those values, that's another way I can calculate profit. So total revenue minus total costs, or the quantity I produce times the difference between price and average total costs. Both will give me the exact same value. Okay. Any questions on that before we keep moving? So I kind of jumped the gun a little bit on the ranges here. Let me think what I want to do in the sake of time. We have 20 minutes. I want to make sure we get through those. So if I had something like this, where would my profit maximizing quantity be? Wherever that marginal revenue or the price is equal to my marginal cost. At that quantity is my price above or below average total? Above, so my profit should be positive, right? In fact, if I can identify, oops, if I gave you more grid lines, so you could identify what that average total cost is. Here, the numbers are a little different in the table, but you can kind of see like it would be at a quantity of 11. I can identify what those values are. That's how I could calculate my profits. Okay. Same kind of thing. I'm going to go through these kind of quick. We'll use some more examples on Thursday's class, but I want to get to something before we leave today. What if I had something like this? So let's say, I don't know, different cost structures. So I didn't change the value of the price, but let's just say it was lower. Well, now where's the price hit or where's marginal revenue hit marginal cost? It's at a quantity that is below my average total. So now what's going to be true? My profits will be negative. In fact, I can calculate them by taking that new quantity, multiplying it by the difference between price and average total cost. But now if average total costs are higher, I know that difference will always be a negative value. And then kind of skip through, don't worry about the numbers here. My break-even point would be if that price or that marginal revenue hits marginal cost exactly at that minimum point of the average total cost, price is equal to average total cost, my profits would be 0, right? So these are kind of our three kind of different ranges. Okay? Now we're going to talk about one more type of range, which is when do firms choose whether or not they stay open or shut down in the short run? Okay, so we've got some examples, but in the short run, sometimes, even though we can identify the profit maximizing quantity, when we're doing that using when marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, that is finding the profit maximizing quantity, assuming we stay open. It might be more profitable for us just to shut down. So ski resorts in the summer, right? It's we don't continue to operate because they know that the price people are willing to pay is much lower, right? So that price lowers, it might fall below their average total cost. They might decide, oh, well, we're earning negative profits. We don't want to stay open. But it's not just am I earning negative profits. It has to be if I'm making the decision to shut down, it must be more profitable to shut down than if I continue to stay open and kind of mitigate my losses. So you think about like an ice cream store, their sales are definitely, the price they could charge, definitely higher in the summer. During the winter, though, they might stay open and maybe they don't earn positive profits, but they minimize their losses, right? If they just shut down, their losses would be greater than if they stayed open. Maybe they still have losses, but they're not as large. So how do we make this shutdown decision, right? So what is our shutdown rule? We're going to go back to thinking about that profit equation where my profits are the quantity I'm selling times the difference between price and average total cost. So I'm going to rewrite this a little. What are my average total costs? That's the sum of. So what are my two types of costs? Average variable and average fixed. So I'm just going to rewrite it like that. I'm now going to kind of pull this out here, distribute my quantity. What is my average fixed cost times quantity? So just my total fixed costs. So notice if I stay open, so we'll think about two scenarios. If I shut down or I stay open, what's going to be more profitable? So let's assume that price is below average total cost, so I know my profits are going to be negative. If my profits are negative, the next decision I have is, well, am I better off shutting down or remaining open? If I shut down, what's quantity? 0. So what are my profits? I just have to pay my fixed costs. If I stay open, well, if price is below average variable costs, then what's going to be true? This component would be negative. So I'd be adding a larger negative value. So if I stay open, basically, how can I minimize my losses? Only if that price is above the average variable costs. So if price is above average variable, this would be a positive amount. And then my losses would actually be a little bit smaller. If that price ever falls below average variable, well, now it's my losses of shutting down plus another negative value. So I'll choose to shut down if that price ever falls below average variable. And we kind of call it that shutdown point would be exactly where those are equal, right? We'd be indifferent about staying open or shutting down. So the relationship of price and average total cost tells us about whether or not profits are positive or negative. That's our break-even price. The relationship of price to average variable cost tells us about whether or not we should shut down or stay open in the short run. Okay. Any questions on this idea before we keep moving? I want to give you kind of a visual here. I've gotten the slides, and I might build this out in class. So this is basically what I just kind of went through on the board. Here I want to give you this visual, right? So I've got my average total, my average variable cost, and my marginal cost curve. My marginal cost curve intersects the averages at their minimum point. So here, what would my break-even price be? So the point where profits would be 0 is at a price of. So where's the break-even price? It's at that minimum point of our average total cost curve. If the price was $3, marginal revenue would be equal to marginal cost at a quantity where that price is equal to average total. So my profits would be 0. So if the price is above 3, I definitely stay open because my profits are positive. If that price falls below $3, if it's in between what, like 210 and 3, there my marginal revenue would hit marginal cost here. The price would be above average variable cost, but below average total. If it's below average total, my profits are positive or negative. Negative. But if it's above my average variable, we said that by staying open, I can minimize my losses. So anything in the range of the minimum point of my average total and average variable, that's going to be the range where I'm going to have negative profits, but staying open minimizes my losses. If the price ever falls, so here was kind of positive profits, negative profits, but I stay open and minimize my losses. If the price ever falls below that minimum point of my average variable cost, now the profit maximizing quantity, where marginal revenue, where the price hits marginal cost, is going to be a point below my average variable. So now if I stay open, all I'm doing is I'm increasing my losses. I should just shut down, just pay my fixed costs. I'd actually be better off in that range if the price is in that range to just shut down. Okay. And then here's kind of another summary that goes along with that visual in terms of what those ranges are. That equilibrium price is above the average total, positive profits. Below average total, but above average variable, negative profits, but I stay open to minimize my losses. Price falls below average variable, negative profits. I'm just going to shut down. My profits become just my fixed costs. Okay. All right. So I've got something here that we'll do for the remaining 10 minutes. And I might go through it kind of quick. We'll kind of revisit this stuff next class. I went through a little bit quicker. I know we're going to revisit with some additional examples in class on Thursday. And we'll work through this together since attendance isn't always great after an exam. Maybe I tend to be friendly. It's always amazing how people want to do all this stuff to get a better grade. And then the class after the exam, the attendance isn't as high. But we'll go through this kind of quick. So the first two questions are going to be the ones that are worth points. So make sure you're listening. The last one is one that we're going to go over if we have enough time. If not, we'll revisit it on Thursday's class. So if I have this here, which of these curves do I know has to be my marginal cost? I didn't label them. Why is it the blue curve? It's intersecting the other curves at what? Their minimum point. Now, not only do I know that's my marginal cost, which of these has to be my average total cost? The higher, the black curve. Why? Because my average total costs are my average variable plus my average fixed. So what am I in here? If I have a difference between average total and average variable, I must be in the short or long run. Well, if there's a difference, that means I have some fixed cost, so I'm in the short run. We'll talk next class more about how we move from the short to the long run, but for now, we're in the short run. So if the price, or what will be my break-even price in quantity? That's going to be the price where what? My break-even price is where profits are zero. When did we say profits are zero? Well, profits are the quantity I'm selling times the difference between price and average total cost. It'll be when the price is equal to average total cost. When does that occur? Well, it'd have to be the optimal decision we make is where the price, marginal revenue, is equal to marginal cost. Well, if profits are zero, then that point also has to be where price is equal to average total. So where does marginal cost and average total equal the same value? Looks like here at a price of 425 and a quantity of 350, right? So a quantity of 350 and a price of 425 is where that price or marginal revenue would hit marginal cost. And at that quantity, that price is the exact same value as our average total cost. Another way of remembering this, your break-even price is always going to be the minimum point on your average total cost right here. Okay. Any other point, if you try to like say where would that price intersect it, it'll always be at a point that's not equal to average total cost, right? Any questions on that one before we keep moving? Shouldn't be too crazy. Now, here's one where it's a little tricky, and I wouldn't do this to you like on an exam or a quiz, but I did use this visual for a reason. So let's say the marginal revenue is $125. That means that the price of the good is what? It needs to be marginal revenue as the firm is 125, the equilibrium price is 125, right? They're price takers. So at 125, where does it hit my marginal revenue, hit my marginal cost curve? Oh, two places. So this is going to be a weird one because we have these gains from specialization. Long story short, we might dive deeper into this if we have time. I'm also not going to quiz you on it. You would always kind of produce as long as you have gains from specialization. As long as your marginal costs are still decreasing, you'll continue to produce. So even if it hits your marginal cost curve at 2 points, you know that as long as your marginal costs are decreasing, you're going to continue to produce. So here, it doesn't really matter though. If I ask you this question, you're like, well, I don't know if the quantity is 25 or if I should be looking at a quantity of 225. Because why? At either of those quantities, what's true about the price? It's definitely gonna be below my average total costs, right? Average total costs are way up there. My profits are gonna be negative. But at both those points, what would also be true about the price? It is below. Both scenarios, it's below my average variable costs or that green curve. So if the price is below average variable, what am I better off doing? Shutting down. So what would the quantity, optimal quantity be here? 0. Right? So that should kind of get you the full points for the day. But we got one more question that I could ask you. And once again, we'll hammer this a little bit more next class. So it's not quite fair for me to ask you yet, which is why I had it assigned as 0 points. I figured we wouldn't quite get that far where I wanted to kind of assign points to it. But let's say I have the current equilibrium price is 350. So at 350, what is the profit maximizing quantity? Well, it's going to be where that price, the marginal revenue of the firm, is equal to my marginal cost, that blue curve. So it looks like it's at a quantity of 325. So at that quantity of 325, my price is below average total cost. So I know my profits are going to be what? Negative. But that price of 350 is above my average variable cost. So I know that I should still stay open. So I'm going to produce 325 units. That's my quantity. The price is 350. If I think about my profit equation, that was simply take the quantity I'm producing, multiply by the difference between price and average total cost. If I know quantity, 325, price is 350. What's my average total cost here? At that quantity, looks like it is 425. So what? 425 minus 350 is 75 times 350. I think is 26,500 or 250. But what did I do wrong there? It's not 26,000. The difference between my price and my average total cost is 75, but it is average total cost is above price. Price minus average total cost would be negative 75. So my profits would be, yes, 75 times that quantity of 325, but negative. All right, so that's how you would come up with that value. Right? Any questions over anything I did there? Once again, we're going to get real comfortable with that profit equation. The way we calculate profits is that optimal quantity times the difference between price and average total cost. If we can identify those three things from the graph, we can then always calculate the value of profits. Okay? All right, before you get too loud here, I've got it set. Make sure you're getting it submitted before 10:50. We went through the answers. You only need to get the first two correct to get the full points. Other than that, stop by office hours if you want to see your exam. I will see you guys on Thursday.